Tonight at 10, Boris Johnson finalises plans for the gradual easing of the coronavirus lockdown in England. But the government warns that while infections are falling, the numbers in hospital are still a major burden on the NHS.
Clearly, the level is still far too high. That's why the Prime Minister will be setting out a roadmap. We can't lift the measures right now, but we can see that direction of travel.
The Prime Minister's announcement tomorrow comes as the vaccination rollout is speeded up, also tonight. Thousands pay their respects in Myanmar to a young woman shot during protests against the military coup. The machine that can revive donor hearts, cutting transplant waiting times for children.
I'm ecstatic that I got such an amazing gift of a heart, but it's also upsetting to know that someone also died.
And a record 9th Australian Open title for Novak Djokovic in Melbourne. Good evening. In a much-anticipated announcement, the Prime Minister is expected tomorrow to lay out a roadmap for the beginning of the easing of the coronavirus lockdown in England. Senior ministers have been meeting to finalise a timeline, with Boris Johnson insisting that this must be the last lockdown. After a cabinet meeting in the morning, he'll outline his plans to MPs. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, says there are likely to be several weeks between each step of the relaxation to monitor the effects. And it comes as the government released plans to speed up the vaccine rollout, promising to offer every adult in the UK their first jab by the end of July. Here's our political correspondent, Helen Catt.
It's a tiny bottle that could have a big impact. More than 17.5 million people in the UK now have some protection against COVID. Every adult will be offered their first jab by the end of July. The Prime Minister promised this lockdown would be different because of the vaccine, as it would offer a way out. So does this brighter news bring hope for lifting the restrictions in England soon?
There are signs that the numbers in hospital are falling much more sharply than they were in the first wave. And there's further analysis to be done on that. But clearly, the level is still far too high. That's why the Prime Minister will be setting out a roadmap. We can't lift the measures right now, but we can see that direction of travel.
The roadmap has been finalised and will go to Cabinet for approval tomorrow. For now, only a handful of senior ministers and scientists know exactly what's in it. Downing Street has said the top priority is getting all children in England back into schools. It's expected the roadmap will confirm that is happening on March the 8th. Teaching unions are concerned and would prefer a phased return, but the Labour leader wants to see all children back too.
Ideally, the 8th of March. We'll have to see, obviously, where the data is, see where the science is, but that's what we should be working towards. If that means more testing, if that means Nightingale classrooms, if it means other measures, let's do that.
Beyond schools, Downing Street says the absolute priority in England is allowing families and friends to start meeting again. For most of us, the government is looking to the outdoors for social contact. That's likely to start with a tweak to the rule on exercising with one other person to allow meeting to socialise too. But care home residents will be allowed regular indoor visits from one named person from the 8th of March. The vaccine rollout has been good news for the Prime Minister, but it does increase the pressure to get his roadmap right. What he says tomorrow will be the first step towards ending the lockdown in England. Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland will chart their own routes out. But the progress of the vaccine programme means politicians will do that against a backdrop of hope right across the UK. Helen Catt, BBC News.
Well, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, says early data suggests there's a reduction in coronavirus transmission by people who've been vaccinated. But it's still unclear how the jabs work against the South African mutation of COVID-19. A single case of that strain has been confirmed in Brentwood in Essex, and surge testing is now being expanded there. So what are the main factors to be considered in deciding when and how to ease the lockdown in England? Here's our health correspondent, Sophie Hutchinson.
So what is a safe way out of lockdown? Scientists say it relies on a mix of low infection rates coupled with high levels of vaccinations. That's why the government's so keen to drive up the numbers of people getting the jab.
Already, more than 17.5 million people have had their first dose of a coronavirus vaccine in the UK. By mid-April, everyone aged over 50 and anyone who's younger with underlying health conditions will be offered the jab. That's around 32 million people. And by the end of July, all adults in the UK, that's more than 50 million people, should have had their first dose of the vaccine.
Whether those who've had the vaccine can still catch and spread the virus is a key question. But there's been some encouraging news from Israel. It's started opening up again since almost half of the population has received a vaccine, and initial data suggests it may have reduced the spread.
We have seen early data that there's a reduction in transmission from those who get the jab. But that is early data, and there's more work that's being done.
New variants are another concern. Brentwood in Essex is the latest place where residents will undergo testing after a case of the South Africa variant was discovered there. Scientists say it's vital infection levels are kept low.
The more infections there are in the community, then the greater the risk of further mutations occurring. And so it's certainly a risk if we allow high rates of infection in certain parts of the community, so younger individuals.
But the biggest test of all when it comes to lifting restrictions is the number of seriously ill people in hospital and those losing their lives to COVID-19. Ensuring there's no return to rising numbers and a third wave will be key to the safe unlocking of society. Sophie Hutchinson, BBC News.
Let's get more now on tomorrow's expected announcement for the reopening of schools in England. Our education editor, Branwen Jeffries, joins us now. Branwen, what can we expect, do you think?
Well, it's the detail now that really matters for parents and for schools. We know that the government's ambition is that all schools should begin to reopen from March the 8th. Testing is likely to play a very key role. Secondary schools have received tests already, and staff can be tested twice a week. But secondary school pupils may also be offered voluntary tests on their return to school. Now, that raises the prospect of whether or not they will return year group by year group to allow schools to manage that. Head teachers really want the details on how that will work. For primary schools, there is an ambition to extend testing there too, with the possibility that parents might be asked to do the swab tests voluntarily on their children. But will there be other precautions as well? We know that face coverings have been used in school corridors for many months now in areas of high transmission. But Northern Ireland, for example, has changed its advice to tell schools that secondary school pupils should be wearing them in the classroom too. So will we see that in England? But none of this meets the concerns of the education unions. One is calling for vaccination for school staff tonight. All of them are saying a much more gradual approach is needed. They're calling the return of all pupils at once a reckless move. But of course, that gradual approach is exactly what's happening here in Wales and also in Scotland, starting tomorrow morning when the very youngest primary pupils will be back in their classrooms after 2 months of being away.
OK, Branwen, thank you. Branwen Jeffries there, our education editor. Well, as we've been hearing, the government says it wants to focus on data rather than dates in deciding whether to ease the lockdown in England. The latest figures show there were 9,834 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, with an average of 11,062 new cases recorded per day in the last week. There have been 215 deaths recorded of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID test, meaning on average 488 deaths were announced every day in the past week, taking the total to 120,580. So far, more than 330,000 people have had their first dose of one of the approved COVID-19 vaccines in the latest 24-hour period, taking the total to more than 17.5 million people. Well, Helen Catt, our political correspondent, is here. Helen, obviously the state of the NHS is an important factor in any easing of the lockdown. But what about other issues, like the economy, for instance?
Yeah, there's a lot that's having to be taken into account here. It isn't a case of just looking at controlling coronavirus in isolation. Politicians are also having to weigh the economic costs, the social costs of keeping restrictions in place. And they have to look at all that and try to find a balance. Now, during the pandemic as a whole, the government hasn't got everything right. Even ministers would admit that. The pressure for them to get the England roadmap right is really high. So it's not surprising, I don't think, that the signal we've been getting over the last few weeks is that ministers are likely to stay on the cautious side here. They really do want this to be the last lockdown. So tomorrow is undoubtedly going to be a really big moment for England. It is the point where we will see this plan for what is going to get us out of lockdown. But in terms of seeing really significant changes to many, many areas of our daily lives, well, that does sound like that might still be quite a few weeks off yet.
OK, Helen, thank you. Helen Catt there. Well, the United States is on the verge of becoming the first country in the world to register 500,000 deaths from coronavirus. The infection rate is now slowing, but President Biden's chief medical advisor for COVID-19 is warning the country isn't out of the woods. Here's our North America correspondent, Lebo DiSecco.
Remembering the lives behind the numbers. 500,000 people lost. That's more than the number of Americans who died on the battlefields of World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War combined.
I'm not gonna lie, I used to think, like, oh, my family ain't gonna get sick. Anybody gonna catch it. None of my loved ones gonna get COVID. And oh, was I wrong? I was so wrong. Even though I've had family members who caught it, she the only one that died. Out of all my family that caught it, she the only one that died.
Lakeisha lost her mother Tracy in April last year. She got COVID at the nursing home where she lived in New York. She was just 55.
I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye. I didn't get a chance to get to New York to hold her hand one last time. I didn't get a chance to do any of those things. It was just, it happened so fast.
From coast to coast, the grief is felt. Thomas Dupar died in California, the state where the first US COVID death was recorded just over a year ago. His granddaughter Katie says he was the life and soul of any party.
He was such a character and, you know, surrounded himself with people constantly, loved being around his friends and family, and then to be alone, I think, you know, that was like the opposite of what he would have wanted, or, you know, and we all would have been there, obviously, if we could have.
With America's new president, a new approach to the virus.
We now have a national strategy to beat COVID-19. It's comprehensive. It's based on science, not politics. It's based on truth, not denial.
But Lakeisha is still angry over the government's mistakes of the past.
Y'all didn't protect us. I feel like you didn't protect us. You just threw us out there and just let us fend for ourselves and had everybody just wonder what's next, what's this, every day is a change, every day is something different. It's just, there was no protection for this.
With the rollout of vaccines, there's growing hope for an early end to the pandemic. But for thousands of Americans like Lakeisha and her daughter, the pain is still raw as they try to make sense of the world without their loved ones. Lebo DiSecco, BBC News, Washington.
A 4-year-old girl and a man and a woman in their late 20s have died in a house fire in Exeter. 3 other children, 2 boys aged 4 and 9 and a 7-year-old girl, are in a stable condition in hospital. Police are calling it a deeply upsetting and tragic incident and say they're not looking for anyone else in connection with the blaze. Matt Hancock has insisted that transparency about contracts signed with companies during the coronavirus pandemic is completely second order to saving lives. The Health Secretary was responding to a High Court judgment which found his department had acted unlawfully in failing to disclose on time details of deals to purchase items such as personal protective equipment. The government is meant to publish contracts worth more than £120,000 within 30 days. The Duke of Edinburgh is to spend a 6th night in hospital in London. Prince Philip, who's 99, was admitted last Tuesday for a period of observation and rest after feeling unwell at Windsor Castle. The exact reason for his admission hasn't been disclosed. However, his stay isn't related to coronavirus. In Myanmar, thousands of people have lined the streets for the funeral of a young woman shot during protests against the recent military coup. Mia Tway Kine died on Friday. Today, there were more mass protests against the generals after the military overthrew the elected government earlier this month. Here's our Southeast Asia correspondent, Jonathan Head.
This was the funeral of an ordinary young woman, transformed into a show of political defiance for these extraordinary times. Myat Tway Kine was one of countless thousands in Myanmar who came out to challenge the military's seizure of power. And she was the first to lose her life in its heavy-handed response to the protests. Scenes of grief which must inflame public fury against the military junta, but remind them too of the cost of resisting it. They had two more martyrs to mourn today, one a teenage boy. Both were struck by live rounds fired by the police in the city of Mandalay. We started this because we don't want a military dictatorship, said this woman, and will fight to the end to make sure these lives weren't wasted. The plan now is to escalate this 2-week-old protest movement into a nationwide general strike, which will cripple the government, but must inevitably hurt ordinary people too, in an economy already shattered by the COVID pandemic. They dream of international intervention to help their cause. This rally is outside the US Embassy. Still a symbol of hope, but a fading one in a world which won't or can't act against generals who won't listen. Jonathan Head, BBC News, Bangkok.
In a world first, children in the UK needing a heart transplant are being offered organs that have been reanimated outside the body. In a collaboration between the Royal Papworth and Great Ormond Street hospitals, hearts can now be revived by a machine repairing any damage sustained during the death of the donor. The new procedure could cut waiting times. Here's our health correspondent, Anna Collinson.
Just a year ago, one of these sisters had a failing heart and was put on an urgent transplant list.
Nice wave.
Freya Headington was warned she may have to wait up to 2 years, but thanks to a new programme, it was just 8 weeks. And within months, she could start doing the things she loved most.
I'm ecstatic that I got such an amazing gift of a heart, but it's also upsetting to know that someone also died.
A donor's family must be consented before surgery, as this training simulation shows. Until a year ago, almost all paediatric heart transplants came from patients who'd suffered brain death. Their heart may beat, but they will never wake up. Life support is withdrawn and the heart is stopped and retrieved. But this new programme uses hearts which have been allowed to cease beating on their own after life support is withdrawn. As soon as this happens, the heart begins to deteriorate. By using this machine demonstrated here using red dye at the Royal Papworth Hospital, doctors can effectively restart it and repair the damage.
We would have the heart sitting with a connector at the top, the aorta.
These tubes move blood through the heart, which keeps it healthy for up to 12 hours, giving surgeons much more time to carry out checks and even transport it to other locations. This organ care system is now used by adult cardiac transplant centres across the UK. But 12 months ago, the team here in Cambridge joined forces with Great Ormond Street Hospital to extend their world-leading service to children. And despite the pressures of the pandemic, treated 6 patients in 2020.
In the adult world, we double the amount of heart transplantation and we reduce the waiting time period, and we had to do exactly the same thing for the pediatric recipients. And at the same time, for both populations, to reduce the mortality in the waiting list. And this is what we achieved.
Once retrieved, the hearts are delivered to Great Ormond Street Hospital for transplantation. Children normally have to wait around 2.5 times longer than adults for a new heart.
For many of our transplant patients now, they're so sick that they have to wait in the hospital for their transplant, sometimes for 6 months, perhaps even over a year. So not only is it reducing wait times, but it's transplanting patients that otherwise would not get an organ.
Freya's family will never forget what they've been through. or the people and the machine that saved her life.
It'll always be there in the back of our minds, but we know now she's got a lovely, healthy heart, and her future's bright.
Freya's father there, Jason Headington, ending that report from Anna Collinson. Now, time for the day's sport. Here's Ollie Foster at the BBC Sports Centre. Hi there, Ollie.
Evening to you, Clive. Novak Djokovic described his 18th Grand Slam triumph as emotionally challenging, but it didn't show on court at all. The world number one beating Daniil Medvedev in straight sets to win the Australian Open yet again. Adam Wilde reports.
There are few players in the history of tennis that have dominated one tournament quite like Novak Djokovic in Melbourne. 8 times a winner before today. There is a slight sense, though, that times in tennis may be changing. Daniil Medvedev at the forefront of the sport's next generation. But Djokovic, well, he's not the type to let up nor let go. The mark of a great champion always, the hunger for more. Set 1, hard fought. Superb. For Djokovic, hard won. Medvedev giving everything, getting nothing. The feeling of so many players before him when faced with the brilliance of Djokovic. Things now beginning to fall apart for Medvedev, his racket here included. In truth, Djokovic remains just too good, at times unplayable. The complete player, roaring himself onward towards yet another title, winning in emphatic style.
I would like to thank Rod Laver Arena. I love you each year more and more. It's been love affair keeps going. Thank you so much.
The greatest the Australian Open has ever known. The next generation will just have to wait. Adam Wilde, BBC News.
The Premier League and Scottish Premiership leaders have both been playing today. Highlights follow the news, but stay right there if you want the results. Manchester City are still 10 points clear after their 1-0 win away at Arsenal. Raheem Sterling scored the winner inside the first couple of minutes. That extended their winning run to 18 in all competitions. City's nearest rivals, Manchester United and Leicester, are level on points in second and third after both also won today. West Ham have broken into the top 4 after a 2-1 win over Tottenham. It's 35 years since the Hammers have been in that position at this stage of the season. Rangers are moving ever closer to the title in Scotland. They won 4-1 against Dundee United and are 18 points clear of Celtic, who lost 1-0 at Ross County. Now, the leaders, Bristol Bears, threw away a 25-point lead to draw against London Irish in the Rugby Union Premiership. Tom Parton went over for the Exiles in the last couple of minutes, and the conversion tied the scores at 34-all. Bristol are 3 points clear of champions Exeter in the table. It's been a huge upset in the final of the Welsh Open snooker. Outsider Jordan Brown has beaten the 6-time world champion Ronnie O'Sullivan. Northern Irishman is ranked 81st in the world and had never played in a major final before. Though it went to a deciding frame, Brown showed great composure to see out the match, winning 9 frames to 8. The 33-year-old also takes home £70,000. Sir Ben Ainsley's America's Cup dream is over. Ineos Team UK was well beaten by Luna Rossa, the Italian boat, winning both races in Auckland today to take the Prada Cup 7-1. They'll now take on the holders Team New Zealand for the main prize, the America's Cup, next month. Ainsley says they'll go back to the drawing board. Much more on the BBC Sport website, of course. You can catch up on all the stories that we've been bringing you, giving a sporting perspective of LGBT plus History Month. But that's all for now. Clive.
Ollie, thank you for that. Ollie Foster there. And that's it. There's more throughout the evening on the BBC News channel, but now on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Have a very good night.